Top of the hour, 1 o'clock, October 14th, 2021. Hello and welcome to the Virginia Solar Summit live stream. I'm your host, Dan French. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. The Virginia Solar Summit is a diverse community of solar energy, real estate, environment, and economic development professionals. We are a collaboration of diverse organizations with a common goal: to catalyze the ground-mounted solar power renaissance in Greater Virginia in order to re-energize our economy, revitalize our communities, and restore our environment. The collaborative organizations behind the Solar Summit, the Virginia Solar Summit, include Appalachian Voices, the Virginia Department of Energy, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, the Western Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University. We are substantively focused on the development of ground-mounted solar energy. We are tactically focused on land use and redevelopment. We are geographically concerned with Virginia and West Virginia, but we are regionally oriented towards similar solar developments all across Appalachia. We organize a market-making, groundbreaking, and always entertaining event, the Virginia Solar Summit, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one in Richmond in the spring. Plug into the Renaissance and learn more on our website, virginiasolarsummit.com. The Virginia Solar Summit live stream is brought to you by Dominion Energy and Mission Disposal, and we thank all of our sponsors. On this episode, we have Dr. Brian Anderson. There's Dr. Anderson, the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization, newly appointed by President Biden. And we're really looking forward to his remarks. Again, we are brought to you today by Dominion Energy, as well as Mission Disposal, the essential site services company. So we have the giant utility and the company down on the ground really making it happen. We're proud to be brought to you by both of them, as well as all of our sponsors that you can see here. We thank each of them for their individual work, both in the public sector and the private sector. A lot of organizations, a lot of entities doing this important work to save the planet. Quickly, I want to spread the love, send some beautiful love around to some of the other communities which are organizing and pushing the cart of the Renaissance forward. Next week, the Virginia Clean Energy Summit, October 18th and 19th, they have kind of the outgoing keynote remarks by Governor Northam, who's done so much in recent years to get the Renaissance in Virginia where it is today. I think it's going to be some of his final public remarks as governor, so don't miss that. He's actually speaking, I think, on Monday, the 18th. We have the Advancing Women's Leadership in Clean Energy, that's C3E, also coming up soon. Justice and Equity in Clean Energy. I highly recommend this forum. They're giving out awards. They're recognizing leaders in this space doing a lot of things. And also from our friends at CHESA, in November, I'm really looking forward to Solar Focus. You can see the website down at the bottom, solarfocusconference.org. That's always a great one. And then I want to get right to our featured guest today, Dr. Anderson. We're really lucky to have him. He's a busy guy. They've taken a whole government approach. They're bringing together a dozen different federal agencies and organizations, leveraging their combined might and combined expertise, all those big brains, pushing on this big revitalization question. That's the pathway to the Renaissance, is through revitalization, I believe, of our legacy assets. We're going to get to that, but let me introduce Dr. Anderson. He's the director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, NETL, within the Department of Energy. In this capacity, he manages the complete NETL complex, which includes a lot of things: delivery and execution of the broader laboratory's mission. And he leads NETL's national programs, both in fossil energy and other DOE mission areas, working with industry, universities, and other national laboratories. He began his career actually at the University of West Virginia. In 2006, he was an assistant professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering, so he's a real doctor. He knows this stuff through and through. And throughout his tenure at WVU, he became recognized for his work in science and a subject matter expert in natural gas. We actually crossed paths professionally, but I'll get to that later in the show. In 2014, importantly, he founded and built the WVU Energy Institute, which is the largest energy collaborative and research organization at the university, focusing on advanced technology through research, development, and demonstration within the energy industry. But this year, and most germane to our conversation today, on top of all his experience and accomplishments professionally, President Biden named him the executive director of the new Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Revitalization. And in this role, Dr. Anderson is strategically leveraging the national laboratories resources and the other 12 agencies I mentioned, as well as their expertise to ensure the shift to a clean energy economy that creates good paying union jobs, spurs economic revitalization, remediates environmental degradation, and supports energy workers in coal, oil and gas, and power plant communities, who we know have heard so much. So with that, I think I've given you a really big introduction, Dr. Anderson, but we know in this space, we've got a lot of work to do here. We've got a lot of solar to build. We have 500,000 abandoned mines in this country, 1 million brownfields. There's a lot of work to do, as well as solar to build. Welcome to the show.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the folks who've joined us today. It's really exciting for me to be asked to help lead this interagency working group and to bring NETL's expertise to bear. You know, NETL is the national laboratory. We've been around since 1910, 111 years, and in 1910, what's little known is in 1910 we were founded after a spate of mine explosions in 1908, and so the government asked to stand up a laboratory to try to reduce the risk to miners in subsurface mining operations. And so for 111 years, our mission has evolved, and here we are now full circle, going back into the mining and coal and power plant communities, and trying to make sure that those communities and the workers have a brighter future. Sorry to use your a solar pun on you.
Oh, we love puns. That's okay. But you're absolutely right. It's kind of a reignition of America's energy and industrial legacy. But can we begin at the beginning? Actually, I gave kind of your bio, but I'd love to hear, from you were already mentioning centuries, and our audience also knows I like to count in centuries often. We have deep West Virginia roots. Can you kind of begin with your own bio, personal bio? How did you, become a scientist and get excited about energy?
Sure. Well, speaking of century, so part of my family has been in West Virginia, or what is today West Virginia, for about 3 centuries, a little over 3 centuries at this point. And so my grandfather was an underground coal miner. My father grew up in a coal camp in the middle of West Virginia, Carbondale number 9, long since closed, across the river from Montgomery, West Virginia. I have other parts of the family roots in eastern Kentucky in the coal mines there, and grew up in central West Virginia. My father ended up in the oil and gas space, as a matter of fact, and my mother was an elementary school teacher and principal, and so growing up, I wanted to kind of combine teaching and engineering, and I ended up becoming an engineering professor. What do you know? So, but I've been interested in the energy space really all my life. I had a hard hat. This is breaking some OSHA rules today, but when I was 5 years old, I was on drilling rigs with my father, and so I kind of grew up around the energy space. At MIT, as a grad student, I had the just amazing opportunity to work in the MIT Energy Lab. My main advisor is the director of the Energy Lab. Worked closely with Ernie Moniz when he was there prior to his second stint in the Department of Energy, and just had a great opportunity to move to WVU, found the Energy Institute, and then now lead NETL. There was one stop along the way as part of the Energy Institute at the university where a big focus for us was how we put energy together with economic development. And so started cutting my teeth on economic development in the energy realm back in 2014 under that. And then again, now it came back here with the interagency working group opportunities.
Yeah, and can you speak a little bit more to, you've been kind of in and out of the public and private sector and institutions, and you worked there at the university. I call it a renaissance. There's tremendous opportunity for young people, but we've had some other discussion at the Virginia Solar Summit about our workforce challenge. I don't know if young people, it's really clicked in the size of the opportunity and the length and sustainability of the career path. Can you speak a little bit more to that? And then even more broadly than solar, STEM in general?
Well, absolutely, Dan. I'm so certainly in the solar space, because of the oncoming continuation of our energy systems transition that is going to happen over the next coming decades, is really it's once a century sort of effort. We go back to the Rural Electrification Act, which is when we rolled out a lot of power lines across the country. It is on that order of magnitude of changing, transitioning, transforming our energy system over the next few decades into a cleaner, lower carbon energy system. And with that comes a lot of investment, public sector, private sector, and the jobs associated. So everything from deployment of renewables, solar and wind and geothermal and biomass, those deployments, as well as deployment of low carbon energy in the fossil energy space that we work on at NATL, like carbon capture and sequestration, hydrogen opportunities that when we think of, a lot of people think of the grid as what needs to be decarbonized, but well, the grid is possibly the easier component compared to transportation. If we electrify the fleet, we're going to need more electricity than we use today. And so when we think of the opportunities that are out in front of young people today for a long career path to be right on the edge of that wave of a major energy transition over the coming decades is really exciting. And then coming back to the IWG, it's per the executive order that the president signed his first week in office, January 27th was the signing of the executive order to tackle the climate crisis domestically and abroad. And section 218, don't ask me why I know exactly which sections, is the establishment of the Interagency Working Group. And our charge is to make sure that as the energy transition happens, that we are putting the coal and power plants and energy communities that will see a major shift in their economies, see a lot of the benefit of that transition. And so it includes deployment of renewable assets, and then also a strong examination of supply chains that we have in the United States for deploying the future of our grid and the future of our transportation sector, so that those communities have an opportunity as well.
Yes, supply chain definitely in the headlines every day for a while now, and I think you really hit on a broader point, which is just the cascade. We talk a lot about energy transition, but it really is cascading through the entire economy. And I really hope to light a fire under young people to understand that the future really is as bright as we build it. And as a young person, a couple decades ago, I didn't really know if we'd have the opportunity to have such a smooth energy transition as potentially lay before us now. As a young attorney in the energy space, and Brian, we talked a little bit about this in advance of the show. I worked for British Petroleum. We were beyond petroleum at that point. We had changed our name and all this, and it was the turn of the millennium, and we were very excited about renewables then. There was a lot of investment then, but I was also there when we blew up Deepwater Horizon. And people were talking about peak oil at that time too. Prices had spiked to $149.50 intraday, and I still remember some of those numbers. Things looked really dicey, let's say 20 years ago, certainly 15 years ago. And you were in the space at the same time as me. Can you reflect maybe on some of that crisis from the early millennium, that mentality, and then the incredible transition that we've seen in the decade plus since?
Absolutely. And I kind of liken the early part of this century, about 20 years ago. That was the first attempt at the hydrogen economy. That's back when Steve Koonin was the chief scientist at BP and is now a good friend of mine, as a matter of fact, in terms of paths crossing. And in the beyond petroleum day and age, I was working in the biofuel space. I was working for Cargill, as a matter of fact, as part of my Ph.D. I took a hiatus of my Ph.D. at MIT, and we were working on a biofuels refinery. And in that time, it was there was so much progress made to kick off what has cascaded into the lowering of the costs of renewables that we see today. There was a lot of early investment. The early adopters were in there, companies like BP and many others that were a little ahead of its time. But today, going forward another 20 years, there is a lot more momentum to take those advances and then accelerate and deploy them at large scale. And so today, when we look at the mix of our energy system as a whole, it's still in that the lower end on the supply chains, be it wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, and as we start to deploy farther is where we start to see additional challenges in terms of grid integration, reliability, resiliency, the extra cost for, at some point we'll cross over and we need large scale storage. In some places we need it today in California and other areas with large scale deployment of the intermittent renewables, and that drives innovation into the future. And so I am going to keep bringing it back to, as we need those large scale investments and we need to start building supply chains in the United States, it's the coal power plants and energy communities that we're working on in the Interagency Working Group, who we really want to see workers, the young people in those communities, get excited about the opportunities in the future, and we start seeing the investments made in those communities that have provided the backbone for our energy system for a century, to make sure that they're diverse economies and have a revitalization opportunities in front of them.
Yeah, and I think they are. They're right in front of us now. It's pinch me stuff like a dream. I often like to joke because we really didn't think there for a while that, again, we'd have this opportunity, but economics is kind of taking over. These projects are viable now. And more technologies. It's really hard to stay on top of some of the news, but we've been pushing. I think we've really reached critical mass, and even these larger global supply chain disruptions. We saw it in chips earlier this year, but we had swift action from Congress. I think a $50 billion standalone bill to spur more domestic production of silicon wafers and chips here at home. And I know there's a new bill to do similar things on solar production. And so those things are really literally like pages away. The private sector is ready to go. The capital is sitting there on Wall Street. I think there's a record amount of private sector capital just sitting, looking for investment on Wall Street right now, a few $1 trillion just waiting around. So we really do have a delicious recipe if we would cook it. But we are, as I said, we've got a lot of projects, and you are there now. You are the executive director of the IWG. The Biden administration's really hit the ground running. I've been watching your progress all year. It's kind of amazing how quickly you guys have been able to pull so many different things together. And I think, can we give you an opportunity now to just kind of zoom in, share some of the specifics, some of the collateral that you guys have put together? You've got some new websites and some new resources, and you're doing some other things. So let me see if we can get your presentation up for you. I think that's it.
Yep.
Dr. Anderson, please take us through your recent work.
Well, Dan, and again, thank you so much. And the focus for the Interagency Working Group, and I'll go through some of the details that you highlighted earlier too, is how we can empower workers and empower communities. And so it's why it's a whole of government approach, and it's a real focus, not from the top down, but truly from the bottom up. And I'm going to describe our 4 different workflows for those who haven't seen it, because what we're trying to do is put together the entire landscape of what's on the ground in communities, from the assets, the people, the assets, the physical infrastructure that exists in energy communities around the country, and then with the knowledge of where the energy system is going, how we can put a whole of government approach to put in the hands the tools that the communities need. So this is not the kind of one-time dump of some federal investments. This is get on the ground with communities, plan what an economic revitalization would be for those energy communities and with those energy communities, and then provide the tools necessary for it to be a sustainable, and this is the broad definition of sustainable, sustainable economically, sustainable, creating the sustainable communities where the revitalized economy can last for decades or centuries to come. And so if we go ahead to the next slide, then it's the setup that I mentioned in terms of the executive order signed on January 27th, by the president, putting these federal agencies together. And those, if you're looking on a small screen right now, is the Department of Treasury, the Department of Interior, Ag, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Transportation, the Department of Energy, Education, EPA, the Executive Office of the President, and the Appalachian Regional Commission. And when you think of why these federal agencies were chosen, each and every agency was chosen to be part of this interagency working group because of true equities that exist in energy communities around the country. Some of them are pretty obvious. If we're going through an energy transition, the Department of Energy should be at the table. And I think that's why Secretary Granholm and the department was asked to help steward the IWG. But certainly, health and human services, education, labor, interior, ag, and commerce all have a role to play. And so it's our job on the IWG, the Interagency Working Group side, to make sure that we are bringing to bear the full brunt of the capabilities across all of these agencies. And there are really excited individuals, career federal employees across all of these agencies who are super excited to do this work. And that's it's really amazing when we get on to, when we have meetings and we get into real work being done by each of these agencies on the ground across these communities. That's when it's really exciting, is to see how much effort is going into this. But what we don't want to happen is the burden falling on these communities who, some of them don't have the capacity to write a single federal grant, nonetheless to 11 different agencies. And so it's our job to make their life easier. And so if we go ahead to the next slide, and sorry, I promise not to tap too much into my professor and do a lecture. That's not what today's about. But just really setting the stage. I keep using the word communities, and we have multiple layers of communities. Here on the screen are the 25, quote, priority communities that were identified in the initial report. The president said 60 days, I want to see a report on my desk of how we can affect change in communities around the country, and show the president which are the 25 priority communities first for us to go visit, for us to understand the situations they're in, and we'll continue to have more. And so we're working on additional analyses to add communities of priority and to this list, but these were based on the percentage of coal employment today. And so when we think of the potential for, as we continue down the trend from 52% of our electricity being produced from coal just over a decade ago to right around 20% of our electricity being produced from coal today, going from over nearly a couple 100,000 miners to 40,000 miners, we're seeing a dramatic shift in employment in the coal communities, and have already seen that for decades. Mechanization of the mine resulted in a huge dramatic shift in the amount of employment in the mine, but that doesn't mean that even today with a closed coal mine, that it doesn't dramatically affect the tax base of a community that funds everything from healthcare to fire stations to the local hospital to the elementary schools. And so as we transition and transform the energy economy, we're going to continue to see shifts in the economies of these existing communities. So we also identified 60 different federal funding authorities across the government that can be applied to energy communities, and $38 billion in existing authorities. These are FY21 authorities, since we are under a CR that we'll wait to see what the 22 authorities are. But out of that 38 billion that are possibly directed directly to energy communities, that's what we're working on across one of our work streams with the federal agencies in our interagency working group. Because what we're trying to do is make sure the investments, and you can go to the next slide, the investments are not just spread like peanut butter. That's the last thing that needs to happen. You spread it too thin, you spread it like peanut butter, and everybody goes hungry. But what we're trying to do is identify those communities and the biggest need and make sure that we're coordinating across the government so that investments can be co-leveraged from one agency to another to do projects that make a real difference. And when I say making a real difference, it's about catalyzing the investments. So the federal dollars to go into communities to catalyze the types of investments that then create the competitive advantage for energy communities to attract the private investment as our economy continues to grow, as the energy system transforms and translates in those private sector investments in the future of our energy system. It becomes a no-brainer to invest in energy communities. And so that's why, we're really trying to just use the federal dollars as a catalyst, not as long-term support, and create the sustainable communities. And we're really targeting the highest needs. And so just a couple more slides here, and we'll drop the visual aids. But the approach we're taking is across, I've mentioned 4 different work streams. It's starting with stakeholder engagement. Again, we're not going to operate in a vacuum. We didn't, the initial report, we reached out to hundreds of stakeholders to hear the voices of people on the ground, folks who have been doing this for years, organizations that have been working on the just transition. And so, we didn't want to start from ground zero. And then also, we have been engaged with, at this point, nearly 3,000 individuals across these 25 priority energy communities around the country, so that we can hear some best practices, understand the needs truly of communities, and we're listening. We're really listening. And so our approach is to partner with non-federal organizations. We've done webinars, we've done workshops. You can see some geographic dispersity, and then leveraging other agencies, agencies that are partner agencies within the IWG, in addition to just our staffing. And so we've had these particular public events, which are targeted toward practitioners who are trying to develop proposals, because there was a big announcement from EDA. Proposals are due in 5 days, unfortunately. So this is, we're probably not going to be able to put one together in the next 5 days, which is why we wanted to hit the ground very hard to make sure that all of the communities are understanding of what the opportunities are out there. So I've talked about stakeholders, the stakeholder investments, stakeholder engagement. That's one big workflow. The other is in investments, how we can make sure that the investments are catalyzed and targeting. Another workflow is in the area of policy, and that is so that we can integrate climate policy with financial policy with economic development policy. And so it's all informed. And then the last is integration, and that's how we put together the effort of all of the federal agencies I mentioned earlier, and ensure that the communities have some capacity building to be able to apply for the federal funding. But then ultimately, it's our job to make the barrier lower. Not really to lower the barrier, but it's hurdles that, honestly, I'll just give you I'm going to drop the federal hat for a moment and be self-critical. It's sometimes pretty hard to do business with the federal government, and our job is to make it easier. And then just that bluntly, in one of our very first workshops, an important stakeholder voice said, I want to challenge you, Dr. Anderson, it was directly to me, to innovate in the way that the federal government does business, because we in the communities can't do it your way. We don't have the capacity. We have this huge, we're throwing around $38 billion numbers. And so we have big organizations that write really long funding opportunities. And for a community that it needs some assistance to provide in whether it's infrastructure or education or workforce, or brownfield redevelopment, it's often very difficult to write those types of proposals. And so we can go on to the next one. The next slide is about how to get in touch with us. And so in terms of stakeholder engagement, and Dan alluded to it earlier, we had a slightly different website, but we are now energycommunities.gov is where you can find out all of the events in the past and the future, our reports as they come out. You can follow us and our activities on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can even sign up for getting the updates pushed to your inbox at our website. And this will become a clearinghouse, a one-stop shop for energy communities to be able to reach in and access the opportunities that exist across all the federal agencies that are part of the IWG. Again, for us to make sure that we're putting all the tools in the hands of folks in communities who are trying to make a difference. And so, Dan, anyway, thanks, and sorry for being a little bit of a PowerPoint, keynote talk, but I really appreciate it.
No, we love that, and our audience is used to that. They might miss it if it wasn't there. We really love the substance. We're a very smart audience, and we actually follow the breadcrumbs. We'll put that information back up. We'll make it available on our website, of course. We did a long form blog on you and the IWG, and I think a lot of folks had already found that. Our blog is pretty popular. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. There's a lot of other resources on our website, virginiasolarsummit.com, including Site Connector, where if you're getting calls from a developer, you want to talk to other developers, you can plug your property information in, and we'll take it to our community of developers. There's a lot of phones ringing and a lot of activity. It's really great. I'd love to see where you guys are stepping in, especially like on the capacity building, because you're absolutely right. We've got a lot of heroes in our communities everywhere, but in our small towns and medium-sized towns, they're lucky if they have a real hero or two who can suffer the brain damage of applying for a federal grant. The pages after pages and exhibits and amendments and attachments. But you guys now are setting up really the one-stop shop. You know who to call. You are the people to reach out to maybe first to help them get started walking down this path.
That's exactly right, and that's the goal. Is that if we have folks who have a great idea about economic redevelopment projects that might touch, there might be a little bit of infrastructure. It looks like transportation. There might be a component that's an innovation in the energy space. And another one that includes some workforce development and education, but it's not clear where to go to with that economic development idea in a cold community. Well, come to us, and we can help find the right home for those ideas.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things available, and then you mentioned kind of the sprint to get up to speed this year, FY21, but we have even more coming FY22, and of course this effort's not going away, it's enduring. So you guys are kind of triaging, getting ready people to go right now, but can you kind of look ahead? We're just settling into the Biden administration, really, and so we've got this nice kind of marathon pace. We're sprinting up to a marathon pace and trying to sustain it maybe, but can you speak a little bit about the forward look on the work?
Well, absolutely, and so certainly on much of the debate on the Hill right now are really three big spending packages. Is right in the middle of this. The three big ones being the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which love to spend time. I'm a technocrat and love to spend time talking about hydrogen and carbon capture hubs that are in the infrastructure bill. The reconciliation package has additional, it's more of the social infrastructure with clear applications in our energy communities. And then there's the annual appropriations as well. And so all of that, again, in terms of looking forward, what we're really going to try to do is simultaneously innovate the way that the federal government does business, innovate the way that our energy system goes through the transition, create innovative policies so that while we're simultaneously decarbonizing and moving down the decarbonization pathway, that we're simultaneously creating the opportunities in communities so we don't end up with big gaps in economic dislocation. And so right now there's just a lot of coordination to be done in innovating our way through this energy transition. And so there's we're part of the National Lab System. We're one of the 17 Department of Energy national labs, and as a director of that national lab, I sit on the National Lab Directors Council. The 17 of us get together actually every 2 weeks. You'd be surprised. And we, for the last few years, have been looking ahead at the horizon and where we're going in many different spaces. Everything from the future of the energy system, which is an effort that I led across all the labs with many of my laboratory partners, of understanding the energy landscape and the right pathway for the United States to move forward in the decarbonization pathway, to the future of computing, the future of biotechnology, the future of the nuclear deterrent, and the future of the accelerator. And so we spend a lot of time and have some of the world's best scientists on our staffs across this national lab system that are all focused on various angles of the energy transition pathway. And so this additional layer of doing it in a manner that doesn't leave communities behind and doesn't exacerbate economic dislocation is really exciting, and one that I think that bringing together the IWG was just a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, and so timely and so needed as the private sector really starts to spin up and turn into renewables meaningfully. Things like ESG, people being very selective on the financial side going forward. And it's not just a U.S. question, it's a global question now. We have been leading the world in foreign direct investment. People don't know this. It's one of the best kept secrets. America has beat China for foreign direct investment for almost a decade now. A lot of European, Asian investors building new facilities, Mercedes-Benz and so on. They want green power just because they're Germans. That's so there's all kinds of reasons kind of pushing us forward. And it really is, I feel like that kind of breakout moment. So I'm curious, you've gone on this listening tour. People are getting really active, in markets everywhere. There's heroes rising up in communities. What are some of the things that you have heard on the listening tour, from communities, from others, both maybe on the positive side, and then some of the hurdles and barriers? You mentioned one earlier, but I'm curious to learn, what it is that you're picking up out there in the world.
Yeah, and so the one earlier is that the capacity is one that just about all the energy communities that we've spoken to have in common. And so there are commonalities like that, as well as even some barriers to leveraging existing assets. And so particularly in the West and some of the Department of Interior managed lands, that there are some barriers to when say a private sector company finishes up using a coal asset, how then can you keep in mind the economic opportunities that might come along with reusing those assets? So, just very specifically, if you build a railroad into a coal facility, and when you walk away, you're required by law to rip the railroad up, maybe isn't the best policy. And so, that's one very specific example. But I think that another area that has been just amazingly enlightening are some of our tribal communities out west, again, in terms of the dependence that some of our tribes, particularly the Hopi, the Crow, and the Navajo nations have on the coal that's under their feet. And in fact, employment in the Hopi Nation is about 80% of the employment was associated with a coal mine. And so when the coal mine closes, it's pretty easy to run that number. But there they are sitting on potential great solar assets. But then there are some other challenges in deploying that, like interconnects, having the right interconnect, and even being landlocked. And so those are some specifics with, and particularly some Western communities, that another big overarching lesson that we learn is that really every single community is different in the assets that they have and the vision that they have, which is why we're not even coming close to a one-size-fits-all approach. We want to make sure that we're building it from the ground up. And so when we look at the way that we've rolled out the investments, or the way we have so far, the EDA announcement, Economic Development Authority announcement, under the Build Back Better opportunity, first is planning grants. Then there's the economic clusters. And so what we are trying to do, again, is work the capacity side from the ground up. And then when we start to put together the investments from the federal side and big infrastructure investments and hydrogen hubs and carbon hubs and things like that, to where they layer on creating what in the end is a coherent plan, as opposed to allowing the agencies to move forward within each of their spaces that is not as collaborative as it would have been if we weren't around. And so that goes back to what we're hearing from communities is that the federal government needs to be quite a bit more thoughtful in the approach to engaging with communities. And then another big one is that, and we knew this going in, but it was really good to hear, the folks on the ground, the heroes that you've mentioned in energy communities across the country, this is something that many of them have been thinking about and trying to tackle for a decade, 2 decades in some cases, or more. And because of their collective learned experience, their experiences over their attempts, we absolutely cannot just bring the same thing to bear that has been brought to bear over and over again. And so the last thing that we can do is have empty promises. That's, communities there are many of them that have been burned. Oh, we've heard this before. How is it different this time? And I think that the biggest thing, how it is different this time, is we're going to learn from the past. And every experience is going to be different, is how it's going to be different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fond of saying that we have a lot of brownfielders in the audience, and I'm an old brownfielder. Brownfields are like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump would say. You really don't know until you buy it in site by site, and sometimes by the square foot. Some of these legacy real estate mistakes, we buried a lot of problems out there. Maybe 1 million brownfields in the country. Nobody really knows. So we after 300 plus years of industrial revolution, there's plenty of work to do to clean that all up in the Renaissance. But it's so real. It's not, we've had a lot of success. We've been doing a lot of solar on landfills for certainly the last 10, 11, 12 years. I think I'd like to say it's the end of the beginning. We're scaling up now. We're getting into the middle innings of the Renaissance. And you mentioned some of the investments that you're making. Can you be a little bit more specific? What are some of the, right now in the pipeline projects that are coming to life?
Well, because so right now the opportunities are out on the street, and with the funding opportunities closing here in the next few days, I can't really speak to the projects that will be funded there. And so we have the suite of funding opportunities that include the mineland reclamation, which that one I can speak to a little bit more that I haven't yet. Similar to brownfields, where here's an environmental legacy that is a liability, and the historic mineland reclamation programs didn't always look to the economic opportunities at the end. And so again, that's what we're trying to change the end state of where reclamation goes to find those opportunities. So those are the projects. And sorry, I can't speak specifically because again, we haven't yet created all the innovations on the federal government side that we hope to, because the way we do business on the federal side is we send out the funding opportunity announcements or notice of funding opportunities, a NOFO if you follow that, and then we have to receive the proposals and and evaluate them on merit. So some, just to give listeners a little bit of a heads up, because some of the policy innovations that we're working on is how we select projects, how we score them and create the merit scoring associated with a project being in a coal and power plant community. So those are some of the other scoring factors that we're putting in place.
Yeah, that's the sausage making that really makes a difference. DOE does it. A lot of, there's a lot of grants. And then on the EPA side too, we have EPA brownfield grants. That season's also spinning up. It's kind of grant season. I'd like to give a shout out to our friends at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality's brownfield program, Mr. Vince Maiden, Mr. Mead Anderson. They're very busy right now. They will also take your calls and questions if you need help accessing those. They can help you with the EPA brownfield grant, but there's also state funding. And then the former Division of Mines, Minerals, and Energy is now Virginia Energy, and they have their own grants, including a new program for mine land reclamation and redevelopment that hasn't been funded yet, but we have a lot of good folks in government, in our public institutions who are kind of standing by and ready to help people navigate both kind of the project lifecycle, but the public sector side of that capital stack. Can we go back a little bit more and talk about, maybe zoom up a level and talk about, you mentioned many times how the public sector can kind of get itself together, attract that private investment. But as we have a lot of funds, that public sector capital stack is taller maybe than it's been in many recent administrations, thanks to President Biden and the Congress, who have loosened the purse strings a little bit. It matches that wall of private money that I mentioned earlier. But specifically, how are we going to help communities out there set the table for private investment?
I think that this is where, when I say a whole of government approach, it's not just federal government. And you brought up, particularly in the state of Virginia, and DMME had a series of listening sessions earlier this year. I see Michael Skipsington here on the call as well, and I was really happy to participate in those. And the Virginia legislature was driving, this asking DMME to put together a report on the energy transition for energy communities across Virginia. The state of West Virginia has put together can't call it a task force, but a working group in the legislature to do just that, and they're doing listening tours, I think, next week and across the state over the next few weeks. And so it's at the federal level, partnership at the state level, then into communities at the whether it's at the county level and even the city or community level, to make sure that we're all communicating, so that there's, it's not necessarily a trickle down, but there is on the federal side, oftentimes a requirement for a cost share. And so there's an opportunity for states to help. That's one thing that I know the state of West Virginia and their legislature is exploring, is a way that they can have some cost share opportunities, again, to access and leverage and really accelerate their investments into communities. And then it's standing up those NGOs that are across the country, across our region, and in those communities that are seeing it firsthand, that are seeing the opportunities, the assets, and the direction that our energy communities want to go, see it firsthand. And so one of the areas, and I get, I hate to keep coming back to capacity building, but that's where we are today, is to make sure that the one-stop shops that exist in communities across the country are not just mom and pop one-person shops, but they have the assets to assist and create the economic revitalization. And so there are ways that across the networks of these organizations, and bringing together everything from the private sector to philanthropy that I haven't really touched on, and putting all of those assets together is a challenge, but it's our job to help catalyze those the building of those networks in communities around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the cross silo approach. It's what we need. It's all hands on decks. It's every hero and champion to the call who will answer the call. Step up. And I just love the kitchen sink approach, or the all government. It's really it's timely, it's needed and necessary, and you're going to fill a lot of the cracks, not just in the capital stack, but in the capacity side. It's a real issue. We have a workforce challenge literally in every field right now. No one has enough people. We have a human capital problem. So we really have to do more with less brain power. And that's not where I'd like to be, but I guess it's a good problem to have. If we had more people, we could do more work. That's really, really the good news. So can we dive in a little bit more on the war chest? And if you guys have questions for Dr. Anderson, feel free to start dropping them in the chat. I want to turn to some of those, but you've got the 30. Go ahead, Dr.
Well, I just noticed there was one question in the chat about storage.
Sure.
And I'll give a shout out to the Department of Energy on this. The first Earth shot out of the Department of Energy was the hydrogen shot, and that was targeting $1 per kilogram of hydrogen in a decade. And the second Earth shot was the storage shot, and so the question was, how big does energy storage or storage play in the federal plan? And it's a huge part of what is needed to build out into the future is grid scale storage. And I even got involved in grid scale storage early on when RPE was first stood up in the Department of Energy. One of the very first programs in RPE was in grid scale storage, and it is still a critical need for us.
Yeah, I sometimes say my prayers for storage at night, because we're a hop, skip, and a jump away to some kind of Jetsons economy, I think.
Well, and I mean, again, I'll give a shout out to the state of Virginia here, in that one of the larger grid scale storage assets on the East Coast is a pumped hydro in the state of in Virginia, and so there are opportunities again when one thinks of what investments need to happen as we transform our energy economy. There are opportunities that abound across our coal, energy, and power plant communities in this region and across the country. And so we want to make sure that folks are aware of those opportunities and bring the private sector to the table, and make sure that the public-private partnerships are built so that we make the right types of investments to brownfields, to mine reclamation spaces, so that those communities become attractive to the private sector.
Absolutely. Can we be a little bit more specific and talk through the plan, like how first 32 billion, you're thinking outside the box, you're looking for champions. I know you can't talk specifically about the funding opportunities, but maybe by category or however you'd like to describe, like what are the kinds of things that you are looking for to both fund and to facilitate and catalyze?
Yeah, so we do have some very specific targets, deadlines, and milestones that have been set out in the executive order. In the very near term, we have some policy recommendation documents of how to coordinate policy across the agencies. It's due back to the White House. That's in the executive order. Looking out at the year time frame, we have a real plan on how we achieve integration on the federal side that unlike has been achieved before. There was a lot of effort a number of years ago on the federal side to do strike forces specific in creating these cross-cutting efforts. And so we're building off of that, but certainly we have really a three-phase plan on integration, and it started with the launching of energycommunities.gov. Being the clearinghouse. The next step is to make sure that all the different opportunities that are out for energy communities are there, that one can find. Then it's making sure that all the resources are in that one place. And as we roll through, if folks follow the way that the budget sausage is made in DC, the president will request a budget early in the spring, and so we're working with the Office of Management and Budget out of the White House and the agencies on the formulation of the 2023 budget request. And that formulation will include lots of sinews across the agencies, again, to create the coordination. But as that rolls forward in the years to come, it becomes more and more integrated. The program becomes more and more integrated across those agencies, and in a phase 2 and phase 3 of that clearinghouse integration piece is how how to again come up with the funding opportunities that are much more flexible to access multiple agencies, multiple types of money for the communities. A holy grail would be a single application. Hey, I'm an energy community and I've got an economic revitalization project. I'm not sure what agency it is, but here's my proposal. And then it's our job to find the money if it's meritorious. That's a holy grail, but and so we'll continue to work toward that. And then when it comes to stakeholder engagement, we did a series of workshops. We're rolling out some other geographically based workshops. We're going to do one in Kentucky. We've got one coming up in Wyoming now as well. And then a series of national workshops that are topical based on funding opportunities and things like, either cross-cutting agriculture, cross-cutting workforce, things like that. So simultaneously working on both sides of that matrix and the stakeholder engagement piece. I think I've covered a bit of the policy integration, investments, and stakeholder engagement, near and medium term plans there.
Yeah, it's a tremendous effort. It's almost impossible to comprehend, but it's happening, and it's so great to see everybody kind of leaning in all at once. In Virginia, Greater Virginia, we see even the private sector, the way Dominion Energy has leaned all the way in. It's amazing what is possible when everybody starts pushing in the same direction. And it's coming very naturally now that the technology, the innovation has pushed the economic viability of these projects to a point where our natural kind of instincts are taking over, and investors are pulling from the top. And that's how we build a renaissance. I think we've got one last question about the salina layers in northern West Virginia relating to hydrogen storage versus methane storage.
Dan must have known that I had spent some time funding a project mapping all the salt formations across Appalachia, and so very specifically, it's for methane storage. When it comes to it's really seasonal flow. We pump it in the summer and we pump it out in the winter. If we get to a very dynamic grid where we need to do load following using, say, a hydrogen turbine, shout out to NETL, we worked with GE on the development of the hydrogen turbine, the HA turbine. But if we're doing load following using hydrogen, we need to be able to pump hydrogen in and out much faster than we do methane. And so the salt formations, deep salt formations, it can be salt solution mine you build a cavern versus building porous media, is a great opportunity for storage of hydrogen. That's the type of storage that you would need for load following. So good question, Dan. Appreciate that.
Yeah, knowing you could handle the fastball there. Well done, and thanks for all the work that you've done. It's been an accomplished career. You got started early. I tip my cap. We need a lot more folks such as yourself to help us push to this highest and best renaissance. So kind of my last question for you, and then we'll turn it back and go out on a strong note. But look, can you look to the future a little bit? Somebody might be watching this in 20 or 30 years. You've done a lot so far in the last couple of decades. What do the next couple of decades hold, and what should young people be looking to expect?
Well, if I really go out on a limb, and I think we're going to end up with a lot more micro manufacturing, everything from 3D printing to advanced manufacturing. And so what I envision is, manufacturing supply chains just become completely more innovative and small scale across the country. Everything from the way that we build cars and our goods. And so these are in people's garages and in communities across the country. And our energy system looks the same. It's a distributed energy system. We have lots of wind and solar. We have carbon capture and sequestration for a big part of the base load on natural gas, and we have hydrogen infrastructure build out. I think we're going to see some tremendous changes in the next 30 years.
I couldn't agree more. I'm getting excited about space and a lot of other innovation. I think there's a lot of growth in the forecast. When I talk to my friends in Washington, I keep talking about a much bigger pie around the corner, and so much more equitably distributed. I like what you said about micro manufacturing, 3D printing. Now, if you hit the books, your future is bright. You're going to be able to make something, do something, create something. You know, it's already happened. We've seen the way innovation has powered the individual. But I want to come back, Dr. Anderson, and let you hit these very important calls to action as we close out the show.
Thank you. And Dan, thanks for giving me a chance to call everyone here to action. Those of you on the live stream, those of you here in Zoom with us, please do sign up for the stakeholder engagement opportunities. We want to hear each and every voice on this topic. We are wanting to find the right solutions to all the challenges that exist in communities. There are opportunities to build some coalitions. I mentioned matching funds, state, private sector, philanthropy. We really want all hands on deck here. And please, again, provide some input on our priority work streams. I went through them, but how can we target the federal investments? What does capacity building really look like in a community? And what should we be doing on the federal side to create that one-stop shop? And we want to hear, if we're not hearing from stakeholders that we don't know about, well, please let us know. Raise your hand and reach out to us. And so you can follow us at energycommunities.gov, and we really want to hear from you and engage in deep, long-lasting conversations. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, and everyone at the Interagency Working Group, as well as the Biden administration, for tasking this incredible effort. I know what a challenge it is to lean across 12 federal silos, but you're up to the challenge. We thank you. I also had the opportunity to interact with some of the tremendous people behind Dr. Anderson. They're all great. I encourage everyone listening now or later to reach out to them, with their help, with your questions, for their help. They have guidance, they have resources. They're putting together new analytics. So stay tuned. Energycommunities.gov. The work has just begun, and I just want to go out by highlighting our special guest on the next episode of the Virginia Solar Summit live stream will be Ms. Tate McDonald, a partner at Holland and Knight. She's done a lot of work with DOE and DOD. We're going to think big. We're going to talk about the future, where the market's going. We're going to talk about some of the supply chain issues and get into some of the headlines. So I hope everyone can plug in 2 weeks. October 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern, Ms. Tate McDonald and myself thinking big about the future. There's a lot of work to do. The future is bright, but only as bright as we build it. So thank you again, Dr. Anderson. Thanks everyone for tuning in live, and you can find us on YouTube and all the podcast channels. Keep up the good work.